Class starts. JustProfessor here. The exact same information can make you feel completely opposite emotions depending on how someone words it. One person says it and you feel optimistic. Another person says the exact same thing and you feel worried. The facts didn't change, only the framing did. And you fell for it without noticing. Think about a company that fires 10% of its workers. One headline says, company cuts jobs for 10% of workforce. Another says, company retains 90% of employees during restructuring. Same event, same numbers. But one sounds like disaster and the other sounds like survival. Your emotional reaction flips based purely on which frame you saw first. This is spin framing, and it's controlling how you feel about everything. Spin framing is when someone presents factual information in a way that pushes you toward a specific emotional reaction or conclusion without changing the actual facts. They're not lying, they're not making things up. They're choosing which true details to emphasize and which words to use to describe those details. The frame they put around the facts shapes how you interpret them. Same reality, different feeling, different judgment, all based on framing choices. This happens because your brain doesn't process raw facts neutrally. You process facts through emotional and conceptual frames. When someone frames information positively, you feel positive and notice positive aspects. When they frame it negatively, you feel negative and notice negative aspects. The framing comes first and shapes everything that follows. You think you're reacting to the facts, but you're actually reacting to the frame someone built around those facts. The problem is spin framing happens constantly and you rarely notice it. Every news article, every advertisement, every political speech, every social media post uses spin framing to push you toward certain feelings and conclusions. You think you're forming your own opinions based on facts, but you're being guided by framing choices that favor whoever is presenting the information. And because the facts are technically true, you don't realize you're being manipulated. Let me show you where this controls your thinking. Political messaging is pure spin framing. The same policy gets framed completely differently by different sides. One side calls it protecting American jobs. The other calls it blocking free trade. Same policy, different frames. Each frame highlights certain aspects and hides others. Each frame uses words that trigger different emotions. You end up supporting or opposing the policy based more on the frame than the actual details. Medical information gets spin framed constantly. A drug company says their medication helps 70% of patients. That sounds good. But you could frame the exact same data as fails to help 30% of patients. Same facts. Different emotional impact. Or they say reduces risk by 50% when the actual risk drops from 2% to 1%. Technically true, but the frame makes a tiny change sound massive. Economic news uses spin framing on every report. Unemployment drops from 6% to 5%. Good news, right? But someone else frames it as 5% of workers still can't find jobs, or unemployment remains near 5-year highs. Same number, different frames. One makes you feel the economy is improving. Another makes you feel it's still struggling. The frame controls your perception more than the actual statistic. Product marketing is built on spin framing. A food company says 90% fat-free sounds healthy. But that's the same as 10% fat, which sounds less appealing. Or they say made with real fruit when it's mostly sugar with a tiny bit of fruit juice. Technically true, but the frame emphasizes the good part and hides the bad part. You make purchasing decisions based on frames, not full information. Crime reporting spin frames everything. A neighborhood has 20 crimes this year compared to 30 last year. One article says, crime drops by 30% in neighborhood turnaround. Another says, neighborhood still plagued by 20 crimes this year. Same data. One frame makes you feel safer. The other makes you feel less safe. Your perception of the neighborhood changes based on framing, not based on different facts. Climate discussions get spin framed from all directions. Temperature data shows warming. One side frames it as catastrophic climate crisis requiring immediate action. The other frames it as modest warming within historical variation. Both sides use real data. Both sides spin frame that data to push you toward their preferred conclusion and emotional response. Education statistics face constant spin framing. Test scores stay flat. One frame says, scores remain stable despite challenges. Another says, no improvement despite increased funding. Same scores. Different emotional reactions. One frame suggests things are okay. The other suggests failure. Your opinion about the school system gets shaped by which frame you encountered. Relationship conflicts use spin framing naturally. You tell a friend about an argument with your partner. You frame events to make your actions seem reasonable and your partner's actions seem unreasonable. You're not lying about what happened. You're choosing which details to emphasize and which words to use. Your friend forms opinions based on your spin frame, not based on neutral facts they can't access. Social media posts spin frame everything. Someone shares news but they add their own framing and how they describe it. They choose which quote to highlight. They choose what emotion to express. They frame the story before you even read it. Your reaction gets influenced by their spin before you've processed the actual information. Job descriptions spin frame positions constantly. A job with low pay and long hours gets framed as exciting opportunity in fast-paced environment with room for growth. Not lying, just framing negatives as positives. A boring, repetitive job gets framed as stable position with clear responsibilities. The framing attracts or repels candidates more than the actual job details. Sports coverage spin frames every game. A team loses but played well. One frame says, heartbreaking loss despite strong performance. Another says, another loss continues team struggles. Same game. Different emotional tone. Your feeling about the team changes based on which frame you read. Financial advice gets spin framed to serve whoever is giving it. An advisor says diversified portfolio minimizes risk when they really saying your returns will be limited. They frame limitation as safety. Or they say growth-focused strategy maximizes returns when they mean high risk. They frame risk as opportunity. Same investments, different frames pushing you toward choices that benefit the framer. Here's what makes spin framing so effective. You feel like you're reacting to facts. The information is technically true, you're not being obviously lied to. So you trust your reaction. You think your emotional response and your conclusions come from the facts themselves. You do notice that someone chose which facts to show you and which words to describe them with. The frame is invisible but powerful. This means whoever frames information first often wins. Your initial frame becomes your reference point. Later information gets processed through that first frame. If you first hear about something framed negatively, positive frames later have to fight against your established negative impression. The first frame sticks because your brain uses it to organize all future information about that topic. The way to fight spin framing is to actively reframe information yourself. When you encounter facts presented with a certain spin, deliberately describe those same facts using different frames. If something is framed as only 50% success rate, reframe it as 50% failure rate. Something is framed as X% of people still struggle, reframe it as Y% improved. Seeing the same facts through multiple frames helps you notice how much your reaction depends on framing rather than on the facts themselves. You also need to look for what the frame hides. Every frame emphasizes certain aspects and minimizes others. A frame that highlights benefits probably hides costs. A frame that emphasizes progress probably hides remaining problems. A frame that focuses on one group probably ignores other groups. Ask yourself what information would make this look different. That's probably what the frame is hiding. Don't trust your emotional reactions to framed information. Your feelings are real, but they're responding to the frame, not necessarily to the underlying reality. When you feel strongly about something based on how it was presented, step back and ask how you'd feel if it was framed differently. If your reaction flips with different framing, you know you were responding to spin rather than facts. The next time someone presents you with information that makes you feel a certain way, ask yourself how else those exact same facts could be described. Could you frame this information to create the opposite emotional reaction while still being technically accurate? If yes, you've just discovered spin framing in action. The facts are real, but your reaction is being controlled by presentation choices. You can't eliminate spin framing from your life. Everyone frames information, including you. But you can become aware of it. You can notice when framing is pushing you toward a conclusion. You can deliberately reframe to see other perspectives. That awareness is how you base opinions on facts, rather than on whoever framed those facts most effectively. Watch the next video to learn another language bias controlling your thinking without you realizing it.